I'm having an identity crisis. Thankfully, this isn't my first time, so I feel better prepared to navigate the terrain of uncertainty while asking myself some difficult questions. The first time, I was only 20 years old. The ink was barely dry on my first degree, and I was halfway through my Bachelor of Education program. That's when I realized I was in trouble. I had pursued a career in education expecting to find a space that fostered criticality with heart and conviction, a place where lived experience was integral to learning, where knowledge was negotiated, power was shared, and equity was paramount. I expected to find a place that encouraged students and teachers to be critically conscious, creatively compelled authors of change. I didn't. Fearing that I'd landed in a context that was impervious to change, I fled the system and spent the next 18 months doubting my ability to survive the crushing disillusionment. Thankfully, this is not that. 20 years later, I like to think I'm not as breakable. I eventually returned to education and invested deeply in fostering those spaces I'd once hoped to find. Critical, creative, equitable, compassionate places where learning has the power to inspire real change. I thought I had. I care about the students, the subject areas I teach, the process, and their multiple points of intersection. I am attentive to challenging assumptions, uncovering biases, nurturing multiple perspectives, and interrogating power. I am aware of the privilege accorded by my background, and I work diligently to leverage education as emancipatory change. I thought I was living my ideals and practicing my praxis. So what happened that brought all this to unravel? A couple of years ago, I married a soldier. Williams 2013 warns me that crossing boundaries into spaces not traditionally mine has deep implications for identity. In the early part of our relationship, my husband and I used to chat about social equity and the ways each of us lived our commitments to making the world a better place. Then, only days after we eloped, he had to leave to prepare for an unexpected deployment. I knew then that I'd vastly underestimated my ill-preparedness for marriage to the Canadian Army. That is to say, I had a pretty low threshold for having my life hijacked. I couldn't help this emotive response, yet inwardly I felt nothing but shame and fear. I was a scholar of social justice. I traveled globally to talk about its import and our responsibility as humans to do more, to be more, but I couldn't gain a solid perspective outside my own interests. Who did that make me? What did that make me? Seeking to examine self in an effort to live more congruently, I reached out to a colleague and confessed that I'd been presented with a troubling criticism about the empty rhetoric of social policy, of which education is an integral part. At first, I tried to resist the denunciation, and then I tried to defend against it. Recently, though, I began to fear the reproof was fair. How do we defend the importance of our work, I asked, to people willing to stare death in the face to protect the human rights we only talk about? How many of us, I probed, are willing to die for our ideals? As I continued to struggle with the incongruence between my values and my emotions, I began to fear that I was a hypocrite. How do I make sense of the professional who claims to be a social justice scholar and the woman who did not want her husband to risk his life in the pursuit of their shared ideals? How do I recover the right to talk about, teach about, and encourage social advancement when I know my own limitations so well? How do any of us come to terms with such limitations? The last time I faced an identity crisis as the result of profession, I understood the source of the problem to be external. This time, though, the conflict was within me. In dialogue with the work of several scholars, I began to interrogate identity holistically as a fluid composite that transcends the barriers of the personal and the professional. Two particular schools of thought are helpful here: personal identity theory and identity as narrative construct. Personal identity theory is a micro-sociological theory that accounts for individual behaviors by considering the roles that society requires those individuals to play. Identity as a narrative construct claims that individuals develop identity through the process of incorporating their reassembled past, seeming present, and anticipated future into an internalized, evolving story of the self that allows them to have a sense of purpose and meaning. Because this narrated self is situated, it is dynamically negotiated with others, an experience that often begets disequilibrium. These tenets forming the basis of my understanding of identity and its construction, my aim shifted to considering the role of counter-narratives in the renegotiation of identity. Thomas and Beauchamp, 2007, remind me that I renegotiate my identity in a shifting world based on my interactions in often unexpected contexts. As I endeavor to do this, Palmer encourages to do so with integrity. He explains identity as an evolving nexus constituted by the convergence of all aspects of our lives, and describes integrity as the wholeness found within this nexus as we continuously renegotiate self. Accessing this wholeness as we redefine ourselves makes room for authority and integrity in claiming identity and helps us navigate the complex terrain found at the intersection of our personal and professional selves. It occurred to me as I read Palmer once again that this struggle is at the heart of my identity crisis. In facing a counter-narrative that suggests teaching for social justice could amount to empty rhetoric, I experienced an unraveling of my constructed self. Only after turning inward to critically interrogate my limitations was I able to identify the aspects of the counter-narrative that opened up spaces for growth. Tickner 2014 discusses this attempt at maintaining a social justice identity as challenging when we are confronted by evaluators and questioned regarding the lengths to which we are willing to go to advance the cause. She argues, though, that teachers can use education as a weapon against social inequity as much as soldiers use their guns. The difference is that the tools of combat are passionate expression of pen, ink, and voice.